I will try not to repeat your questions, although certainly on China and the World Bank, I guess I do want to follow up, and forgive me if you've already responded to this, but as soon as I can find it. So I know that Senator Haggerty was asking about the World Bank's engagement with China, and Chinese firms have received $52 billion out of the $280 billion of outstanding World Bank contracts, and at the same time, state-owned Chinese firms have been debarred for violating procurement policies. So can you talk about how we should be addressing this challenge, and is the World Bank's reliance on Chinese firms problematic, and what can we do to address that? And also, can you speak to whether we should support a suspension of Russia's membership from the World Bank?
Well, first of all, thank you, Senator, for your question. This is actually a question that's very near and dear to my heart. I first started working with our multilateral development banks when I worked at the Department of Commerce and worked with our commercial service liaisons at the various MDBs, including the World Bank, specifically working with them to help American companies be able to win procurement opportunities. And so it would be a priority of mine, if confirmed, to help our American companies get a fair share of the contracts that they are competing for, level the playing field, and expand U.S. markets for U.S. products and services. With regards to China, as I stated with Senator Haggerty, there is no question that we are in a strategic competition with China, and that when it is looking to undercut our values or steal our intellectual property, that it is acting in an adversarial way. Moreover, with regards to procurement opportunities, specifically, I would advocate for a greater focus and emphasis on lifetime costs and life cycle costs, as well as value for cost versus the lowest bid, which is how oftentimes China wins its contracts. Lastly, I would push for resourcing the World Bank's integrity unit to ensure that we are combating corruption everywhere, and specifically also in our procurement. With regards to Russia, I would like, as I stated in the record, to condemn Russia for its illegal and unprovoked war in Ukraine. There is no question that that in the bank right now, since the bank has ceased operations and in Russia, and also ceased all projects in Russia, that Russia is isolated. And so I would work very closely with our allies and build a coalition to ensure that we further isolate Russia. And I am happy, if confirmed, to work with my colleagues to get an answer to your question with regards to suspension.
And when you talked about focusing on some of the other areas that are important other than just the lowest bid for Chinese firms, is there support among the international community and other colleagues at the bank to put in place those kinds of criteria for making determinations on loans?
Well, Senator, thank you for your follow-up question. With regards, to the specifics of those details, given that I'm not in the administration, not yet confirmed, I can't speak to those details of bank management and other executive directors. But what I can say that I will commit myself wholeheartedly to work to build coalition with our allies to be able to advance our values and our interests, especially in this regard.
Thank you. Mr. Weiner, staying on international finance, I want to ask you to explore a little bit more about the importance of the EBRD to rebuilding Ukraine after the war and the kinds of initiatives that you think could be supported by the European community?
Well, thank you very much for your question, Senator. The rebuilding of Ukraine, the efforts that have begun, or at least are being thought about today, really have 4 stages to them. There's the relief phase, which we're in now, efforts then ultimately to rebuild, then modernize, and then ready Ukraine for accession to the European Union. It'll be a form of Marshall Plan, but that really doesn't do it justice because the fighting may not have stopped. Also, there will be multiple donors, not just one, and there'll be one principal target, not to minimize the needs of the other frontline states, but the principal target will be Ukraine itself, not 16 countries as it was in the post-World War II period. It's absolutely critical that the multiple donors that commit to funding Ukrainian reconstruction actually step up, that there be burden sharing. The commitments that have been made by the EU, since that's your specific question, as I understand it, and of course, like the others on this panel, I'm not yet in a position to speak in terms of the administration's understanding, but my understanding is that those commitments have not yet been lived up to, that there's a shortfall with respect to Ukraine, and that's not acceptable. It can't be acceptable as we talk about the rebuilding in a very different sort of way. Because the shooting may not have stopped, we may be talking about rebuilding in certain parts of the country or certain sectors of the economy, and that it may not be unidirectional, it won't be unidimensional, it'll be different. As part of that process, accountability, transparency, oversight, return on investment is absolutely critical, because if the money isn't wisely spent, if we can't account for the money, there won't be a next tranche. And no one interested in the future of Ukraine should be willing to accept that result, including the Ukrainians, of course, themselves. One other point, as we get closer to European Union accession, historically, the European Commission and the member states, the European Investment Bank, and others have funded that process. They did it for every other member state seeking accession as they figured how to accept the acquis communautaire in their laws and worked on infrastructure and so on that met European standards. There's no reason that shouldn't happen in this case as well.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I especially appreciate the accountability piece, because I think there will be more and more focus on that as time goes on. Another area of Europe that I think that is of great concern to me is what's happening in the Western Balkans. It's a part of Europe that I think we have taken our eyes off of after the end of the conflict that followed the breakup of Yugoslavia, and we're seeing the results of not keeping a focus on what's happening there. And one of the biggest challenges, of course, is the economy in countries like Bosnia-Herzegovina. So can you talk about what kind of avenues the EBRD might explore to help countries like Bosnia-Herzegovina?
Senator, thank you. That's a very, very important question, and thank you for posing it. I also wanted to welcome your leadership on this issue, and particularly the legislation you introduced in the summer with respect to the Western Balkans. The EBRD has played a key role in the Western Balkans, in the 6 nations of the Western Balkans, through its financing, its policy engagement, and through hosting of regional summit meetings there to promote regional integration and to advance the Western Balkans as an attractive investment destination. And both of those are needed to maintain the region's stability. Pursuant to the EBRD's investment plan to advance regional integration, the bank has invested more than $15 billion euros in the region, and it's investing more than 1 billion euros a year. It's more than any other multilateral development bank And it shows, again, that an institution like the EBRD can have a big voice in small nations. The key focus of the bank's operations have been to build a connective tissue. I use that phrase both talking about the infrastructure, the building of highways that link the countries, but also in terms of setting up a registry for businesses in the region. 1.5 million businesses are linked together in a way to help facilitate their cooperation. And the bank has placed its emphasis in 4 areas where I think historically it has done very well. Policy reform and good governance, investment in the private sector, which is the bank's focus, and particularly in small and medium-sized enterprises, green economy transition, to use their parlance, including an issue that I know is very important to you, which is the curbing ties to Russian fossil fuels, and trying to overcome the digital divide and help form the digital transformation in these 6 countries, particularly to help youth and to help women. And on that point, let me just say that as the son, the husband, and the father of professional women, the issue of women's empowerment is of critical importance to me, and I would welcome the opportunity to work with you and your staff on those issues, should I be fortunate enough to be confirmed.
Well, thank you. I'm sure we will take you up on that, should you be confirmed. Ms. Sanders Sullivan, one of the developments that I have found quite concerning as the result of Russia's war on Ukraine has been what that's meant to the availability of food for African countries. And what's even more concerning is not just that the food is not available because of the blockade of the Black Sea, although, and I appreciate Turkey's help in trying to negotiate some ships to get that grain out of Ukraine. But it's really the disinformation that Russia has spread in Africa that says that it's the United States that's at fault, not Russia's war on Ukraine. Can you talk about the kinds of things that we might be doing and should be doing with the African Union to help correct that misinformation or disinformation, because I think it's deliberate, in a way that addresses the responsibility for what's really happening with the food stocks?
Senator, thank you very much for raising this important point. The disinformation has become on steroids. There's always been disinformation, but I think the ready availability of all the social media and the speed with which it circulates around the globe is unprecedented. And I think we do need to do a better job of not just getting our story out in a very traditional way, but also developing new tools where we can meet this disinformation on the battlefield. Interestingly, this week, Merriam-Webster Dictionary announced that the word of the year was gaslighting. And if confirmed, I pledge to take that on in a way that not only tells our story about the good things that we're doing with Feed the Future, with working with African partners on a just energy transition, working on amplifying the availability of fertilizer, and also on the food and agriculture piece, working to address the root causes as well as the real-time humanitarian crises that have been exacerbated certainly by Russia's invasion of Ukraine, but also the climate issues. So all of these are intertwined. There's no one answer to it, but we do have our Global Engagement Center. If confirmed, I would work with my team to figure out ways that we might tackle that, not just at the level of the African Union, but there are no more borders when it comes to information these days, and figuring out a way to get our story out there and straighten out the disinformation that is circulating So thank you for the question.
Well, thank you. I think that this is an issue that is also about how do we better coordinate our messages across various agencies of the United States. So USAID, state, all of the efforts that we have, DOD, because we're not always talking with the same message in a way that I think would be important as we try and counter the disinformation that's out there. So I appreciate your response. Mr. Jardine, I had the opportunity a number of years ago to meet with the former president of Mauritius. And one of the things that really struck me, it was at a time when we were trying to do some work in Africa to address the peaceful transition of power. And he had a very impressive story to tell about Mauritius' ability to better transition than most African countries. Why do you think that is? And what do you think, can you assess the current governance in both Mauritius and Seychelles and how it compares?
Madam Chairwoman, thank you very much for the opportunity to answer that question about democracy in Mauritius, why it has experienced successful democratic system, and similarly the experiences that are ongoing in Seychelles. Again, I think both countries, as you noted, do represent potential models for sub-Saharan Africa because of the success they've had. I think it's hard to characterize why some countries are more successful than others. I think in the case of Mauritius, one has been focused on education, which is critical. It's not a large population, so there's a sense of community, I think, that is helpful. In addition, I think there's a strong sense of family and stability within the community. And there's also the historical traditions of parliamentary democracy that they inherited. But again, in some cases, it may be hard to just assess any one country and its the unique development. And sometimes there's also an element of luck, I would have to say. In the context of Seychelles, also similar situation, which it gained independence from the United Kingdom, small population, a fairly close community. However, it experienced a period of single-party state, a coup d'etat in 1977, and which essentially suppressed or stopped democratic progress. However, more recently, they've had a very successful transition, democratic elections, and a transition to an opposition party, as I mentioned, just in 2020. So again, I think it's very encouraging that in Seychelles that they are seeing sort of a path forward and consolidating the success they've had on democracy. And again, I think from the United States position, we want to try to encourage others to look at Mauritius and Seychelles as a model and to see if those countries can assist. I know they're very engaged within the context of the African Union and see that membership is very important. And so I would hope that through that forum that they would be able to, again, exchange and develop that perspective on democracy within the context of that multilateral organization. Again, if confirmed, that would be one area that I want to continue to focus on extensively, which is promoting the democratic progress that those two countries have experienced. I think the key approach would be to engage broadly, inclusively, and to reach a whole cross-section of the communities in both islands, both republics. Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. I hope I answered your question.
Yes, that's helpful.